Yes.
Okay, sorry for that short delay with technical issues. It's my pleasure to introduce Joshua, who will tell us about the geometric and sub-geometric completions of doctrines. Take it away.
Thank you very much for inviting me. So the structure of the talk is I'm going to present some completions of doctrines. I'm actually going to structure it around a completion that I came across in a SYCO a couple of years back in Tallinn, which is Davide Trotta's existential completion. Davide Trotta wasn't actually presenting it, but his collaborator was. So this was really my inspiration for getting into completions of doctrines. So that's going to play an important role. I'm going to start off by just giving a bit of introduction on doctrines, then come over to what I'm going to call these free completions of doctrines. We're going to observe some of the shortcomings of these completions, and then I'm going to present what the solution for that I came up with. And hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll go on to the second half of the title, which is sub-geometric completions. So you'll be hearing a lot about doctrines, given the unfortunate news earlier this year, but this is Lawvere's incredibly elegant solution to how do we do Lindenbaum-Tarski algebras or algebraic logic for a first order setting. So there's this very well-established story about what we should be doing for propositional logics, but the idea for the first order setting is that we're going to be fibering our Lindenbaum-Tarski algebras according to the number of free variables they have. And then categorical structures such as adjunctions are going to give us some of the properties between fibers we would want to have, like existential quantification. So I've actually drawn one out for you, so you can visualize what a doctrine is. So here we have a fiber for each set of free variables, and of course this continues on infinitely. And what I've drawn here is the free doctrine where we've got one unary relation, and we are able to form all sentences involving finite conjunction, finite disjunction. And this is what it looks like, and these maps between them are what happens when we substitute between variables. So this is over 0 variables, so there's only one substitution of 0 variables into 1. Here we're substituting y for y, and this is what happens. Now, I really like this story. I think it's incredibly beautiful because it means that we can recognize algebraic structure on our doctrine and be able to say things about the logic even when that actually isn't present in the symbols. So for example, in this doctrine, I've written everything out using disjunction and conjunction, but there is actually some existential quantification going on. Remember, existential quantification is given by adjunctions satisfying certain properties, and we'll get onto that. And we see that this doctrine actually has some adjunctions going on, that this substitution map has a left adjoint. I send all of my red elements to the top element, my yellow ones to the yellow one, and I'm not sure if the color is coming out, but there's some fetchingly colored purple elements which get sent back along there. So we actually have existential quantification in this doctrine under the assumption that our unary predicate is always inhabited. And so we're able to perform this analysis of logical structures in an algebraic way so that we never actually deal with any of the symbols. So being fibred categories, doctrines come with this very natural two-categorical structure. So this category of doctrines, the objects are going to be doctrines where, just to make it clear, my doctrines have no assumed structure. So there's no structure on the base category, and there's no structure other than them being preorders on any of the fibers. My one cells are pairs consisting of a functor and a natural transformation. And then my two cells are looking like this, where I've got a natural transformation between my functors between the fibers such that I can put a little less than or equals sign into there. And this is the natural place in which to do this analysis of logic, because we can restrict to two subcategories, and this corresponds to taking certain fragments of different logic. So if we wanted to do the logic consisting of just top elements and joins, fibers over a Cartesian category, this is what Jacob calls having fibred finite limits, we end up with what are called primary doctrines. If we want to have some existential quantification, we can take existential doctrines, where now we have left adjoints between our transition maps, satisfying Frobenius and Beck-Cheverly. And our morphisms are morphisms of primary doctrines that preserve our existential quantification. And we also have coherent and geometric versions. So for the coherent version, everything is taking place inside distributive lattices. And for my geometric version, everything is happening inside frame. Notice that I'm distinguishing these as geometric doctrines over Cartesian categories. That will be removed later. And so when we have all of these two subcategories, we notice that we have a hierarchy of syntaxes going on. We've got these inclusion functors, and this is where completions of doctrines come in. When we say we have a completion of doctrines, what we're really doing is building some left adjoint to these inclusions. And this will be the universal completion of that doctrine from one to another. So, for example, we might ask ourselves what the left adjoint to this inclusion of existential doctrines into primary doctrines is. And I've mentioned it already. This is Davide Trotta's existential completion of a doctrine. So, because it will come up later, I'll go into the gory details of what the existential completion actually does. So if we've got this primary doctrine, we're going to take the new doctrine where the fibers consist of these pairs, where we've got an arrow in the base category and something in the fiber of the domain of that arrow. We're going to give it this ordering, where we say gy is less than f of x if we've got a factorization and an inequality here. And then we're going to take the post-settle reflection of this preorder to get the fiber. And our transition maps are going to be given by these tasty-looking pullbacks. And this is the action on objects of the existential completion monad. And so we're actually already able to describe what the left adjoint to the geometric doctrines, fibred over Cartesian categories, the inclusion into primary doctrines, we're able to describe this left to adjoint quite succinctly as we just existentially quantify. This gives you your quantifiers. And then you need to add in all of the joins that you would expect to have in geometric logic. So you just freely add joins to all of the fibers. So explicitly, what's going on is we're taking sets of these pairs and they're upsets of the existential completion. So I want my my set of pairs to be closed under the this order relation, that if f of x is in S and I've got some h and y less than ph of x, then that's also contained in S. And then my transition map is acting by sending that set to the set of all things, where when you precompose with f, you end up in the original set. So this is the action on objects of what I'm calling this free geometric completion. And it's just built up directly out of the existential completion. Okay. However, this completion is not idempotent. The existential completion isn't idempotent, and this free geometric completion is not idempotent. And in a way, that's not surprising at all, is it? Because we're freely adding the data. If we thought about the free group generated on a set of letters, then obviously this isn't idempotent. But it is idempotent, and my motivations for considering this geometric completion is that I want, it needs to be idempotent for the applications that I want to consider for it. And it's also just nice when things are idempotent, that's good. We like idempotent things. Obviously, this free group completion is idempotent if you take as a second argument all of the relations written in the language of group theory that are satisfied by the free group on X. So in order to get our nice geometric completion to be idempotent, we need to think about what relations should look like within this categorical setting and include that as a second argument in our completion. And for geometric logic, at least, although I think this could be extended a little bit further, we should be taking Grothendieck topologies, which Morgan unhelpfully used Grothendieck coverages in his talk, but topologies, coverages, same thing. And if we think about the axioms that topology has to satisfy, then it looks like some Gentzen-style sequent calculus between my logical formulas. You know, the maximality condition is talking about the reflexivity of implication, transitivity is modus ponens, and then we have stability. The stability condition for Grothendieck topologies is stability undertaking more assumptions. So the next couple of slides are going to be less motivated from sort of standard. Doctrine theory has this very nice picture that everything sort of makes sense. The next slides don't concretely look like they should be doing logic, but I will then refer back to standard doctrine theory and make the connection. So just a bit of notation. Whenever I have this fibred category by CR times P, I'm going to denote the Grothendieck construction. This is the category valued version of a category of elements. So I just take these pairs, and then my arrows are arrows in my base category such that the element in my domain is less than the image under F of the thing in my codomain. Whenever I have a morphism of doctrines, so recall a functor between the base categories and a natural transformation between them, I'm going to follow this sort of same standard idea of what's going on with the notation up here by writing FR times A to mean this map, which sends CX to F of C, AC of X. So that's just a little bit of notation. And now I want to introduce this two category of doctrinal sites, which is going to look like a category of doctrines, but now every doctrine also has an associated Grothendieck topology, which is exactly what the objects are. The objects are doctrines where, recall, I have no structures going on. These aren't primary doctrines. These aren't existential doctrines. They're completely unstructured. And then I require a Grothendieck topology on the Grothendieck construction of each doctrine. And these pairs I'm going to call doctrinal sites. And then the one cells are going to be those morphisms of doctrines such that when you take this FR times A, considered as a functor between sites, this is what's called a morphism of sites, or can also be written as continuous and flat, so that is cover preserving and preserves relatively finite limits. And then I also require that the base functor between the categories is flat, by which I mean it's a morphism of sites when both categories are endowed with the trivial topology. And then the two cells are going to be the same as the two cells considered between doctrine morphisms. So it looks strange, I appreciate that, but we're going to connect it back to standard doctrine theory by noticing that a lot of the previous categories of doctrines that we wanted to consider fit very nicely into this narrative. Primary doctrines are when I say one full, that means that I'm full on my one cells and on my two cells. So primary doctrines is the one full two subcategory on objects of a form primary doctrine, trivial topology. Existential doctrines of a one full two subcategory, on objects of a form, existential doctrine, and then this existential topology, which is generated by covers of this form, that my X covers its image under the existential quantification. And coherent doctrines of this 142 subcategory generated by topologies of this form, where you also include data about the disjunctions. And this is where I remove the Cartesianist requirement on geometric doctrines. By geometric doctrines, I'm denoting the 142 subcategory of doctrinal sites on objects of this form, where I have a doctrine taking values in frame and open frame homomorphisms. And the Grothendieck topology I am endowing the Grothendieck construction with is the one whose covers are the ones which it looks a lot like the coherent topology. I take images and then infinite disjunctions. So these are the covers that I'm endowing this with. And then we note that just like we had for coherent and existential doctrines and primary doctrines, my geometric my geometric doctrines over Cartesian base categories is the 142 subcategory of geometric doctrines and also doctrinal sites on objects of a form geometric doctrine over a Cartesian base category with this topology. And now, rather than being a left adjoint to the inclusion of geometric doctrines into a weaker syntax, the geometric completion is going to be a left adjoint to the inclusion of geometric doctrines into doctrinal sites. And it looks this appears in Caramello's preprint under a different name, the fibred ideal completion, where she had a weaker universal condition. But this is the explicit description. And it looks a lot like the existential completion, because we're taking these sets of pairs, f and x, again, an arrow in my base category and something in the fibre of the domain of that arrow, which are closed under the order that we had on the existential doctrine. But we also have this extra condition, which is this J closedness condition, that if I ever have a J covering sieve where everything in the domain is contained in my set S, then the thing in the codomain should also be contained in S, this J closed condition. And then again, my action on the fibers is the same one as before. And so this defines our action on objects of a strict left 2 adjoint to this inclusion. So the pertinent properties for this presentation is that it is universal, that we always have a unique arrow completing this triangle, and importantly, that it's also idempotent. We've taken care of all of the relations that we've wanted to include. So really, this Grothendieck topology is keeping track of the geometric data which is already in my doctrine, any geometric data that I want to keep track of, so that when I geometrically complete that, I'm not freely adding the data, I'm adding it relative to these relations. And just before I get on to the last part of the talk, I want to talk a little bit about this non-Cartesianist aspect, because my geometric doctrines are now no longer over a Cartesian base category. So instead, my geometric doctrines, they have these equivalent conditions. I mean, the first one is the one by which we define them, which is that we want this assignment of covers to be a Grothendieck topology. So if I take any old functor into frames and open frame homomorphisms, then this assignment is maximal. It satisfies the maximality conditions for Grothendieck topologies. It's also transitive, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy transitivity. And we're going to say that my functor is a geometric doctrine when it does satisfy that transitivity. This is equivalent, this is the one time I mentioned topos theory in my topos theory talk. This is actually equivalent to saying that the functor is an internal frame object of a Grothendieck topos, and in particular you can restrict to pre-sheaf toposes. And then the third condition, you only need to consider certain stability issues when you're trying to show that this topology is stable. And this actually comes out as being this, what Olivier Caramello calls the relative Beck-Chevalley condition. So this is this generalization of the Beck-Chevalley condition. And we note that this is a good generalization of the Beck-Chevalley condition in the sense that when our base category has pullbacks, then they coincide. And I think we can sort of already observe one direction that if we have the Beck-Chevalley condition and we get the relative version, so if we had this object here and we wanted to show that its image under L of G is this old nice thing, then, well, L of G is a frame homomorphism, so it commutes with joins. I get L of G existential of F. Another Beck-Chevalley condition says that you can flip those to get something else, and that something else will be contained in G star of S. So that's one direction. Okay, so we've seen the geometric completion. We've seen how this works on doctrines with no assumed structure whatsoever. And in the final part of my talk, I want to really get down into some of the nitty-gritty details, the cool stuff about how these topologies interact with encoding certain amounts of geometric structure on my doctrines. So we already saw that this, the free geometric completion can be obtained by existentially completing and then completing with joins. And this actually turns out to be the same as saying the free geometric completion of P is P existential completed relative to this existential topology that you want to endow it with. And when you write it out in long, ungainly English, it comes out as saying that, well, look, I complete my doctrine according to some fragment of geometric logic. I keep track of that completed data by a topology, and then I geometrically complete relative to that topology. We're saying that that is the same as just freely geometrically completing from the beginning. So this is written out for the existential monad, but I want to show how general this idea is, but this behavior is not exclusive to the existential completion. And to do that, I'm going to give a very general development on what I've called sub-geometric completions. Again, there's going to be a slide of details, but I'll explain why I'm being so pedantic about these details in a second. So we're going to write doc flat for this one full two subcategory of doctrinal sites on objects of a form A doctrine with a trivial topology. And this is the same as just taking all of the all objects of doctrines and only those morphisms such that this is a morphism of sites. And, well, the free geometric completion can be extended from primary doctrines to this subcategory quite easily. And I want to be able to make the distinction between when I'm completing for any doctrines or some subclass of doctrines. So I'm going to specify that I've got some two subcategory A doc of doc. So the objects of this I'm going to call A doctrines and a morphism. A doctrine morphisms. And I'm going to specify that a doc flat is the intersection of this subcategory with doc flat. So now that we have all of those details, I can actually define what I mean by a subgeometric completion. So the subgeometric completion is trying to capture the idea of I'm completing to a fragment of geometric logic, and I can keep track of that completion with the Grothendieck topology. So if I have a two-monad acting on some subcategory, I've written prim doc there, but I forgot to change that. That should be doc flat. If I have a two-monad acting on this subcategory, which is going to be my potential subgeometric completion, we're going to say that it's subgeometric if, firstly, we have a distinguished morphism for which the free geometric completion on P is an algebra for that monad, a strict algebra. So this is capturing the notion of, I'm completing to a fragment because the geometric doctrine is an algebra for that monad. And then the second condition is saying that that added data I can see with a topology. So I just need a topology on the completion such that the unit of my subgeometric completion and the algebra morphism, these are both morphisms of doctrinal sites. And then, you don't necessarily need this extra condition, but it's always nice when things are functorial. So I'm also going to require that my topology makes everything nice and functorial. And when I have these two conditions, I then end up with a commuting square up to isomorphism. So this functor JT takes my A doctrine, it completes it according to T, and it keeps track of that added information by the topology JT. And then I geometrically complete. And the fact that this commutes up to isomorphism is the fact that I can freely geometrically complete that A doctrine to begin with. And so the final thing to mention is that this is a general notion. It doesn't just capture existential doctrines. It also captures any completion of doctrines that you could want, which completes relative to some fragment of geometric logic. So you can existentially complete, you can add joins to all of the fibers, you can add meets to the fibers. You don't even have to add all joins. You could only add joins of some subsets that you cared about. And all of these completions are all subgeometric. And I believe I should stop now, but I would just mention that because something like the top completion, I want to include that as an example. That's why I was so pedantic earlier about the difference between primdoc, which again I've forgotten to omit, and flat doctrines, because the top completion as a monad doesn't act on flat morphisms of doctrines. If you think about the top completion takes each fiber and it freely adds a top element, and the unit is given by including each fiber into the fiber with the added top element. This is not a flat morphism because it doesn't preserve limits. It doesn't preserve the terminal object specifically. And so this monad doesn't act on flat doctrine morphisms, and that's why I was being so pedantic earlier. So thank you for letting me ramble on so much. I'll leave you with a couple of references and take any questions. Yeah.
Would you mind repeating why you needed to restrict to A doctrines?
So you don't need to restrict to A doctrines. My point in this work is that I want to initiate a dialogue with the traditional doctrine theorists, who unfortunately have not shown up in force today, but that's okay. But the doctrines, for example, the existential completion is, as it's currently formulated, is not a monad on flat morphisms of doctrines. It's a monad on primary doctrines, so two-full subcategory. So my desire is that you can pick, you've got your own monad, you can bring it to me and I can tell whether or not it's subgeometric. And I don't need to first see if it extends to the category that I want to work it with. Yes, Axel.
In fact, the fact that the geometric completion is idempotent, isn't it related to also isn't it some kind of relative version of the fact that when you take a small site and do shift on it, and then you put it with the canonical topology, you get this
Yeah.
relative adjunction, which
So yeah.
is idempotent. So this is a relative version of that.
So it doesn't, where do I define it? Yeah. No, this is exactly what's going on. So it doesn't look like it because I've written it out explicitly, but the geometric completion is also the same as, we've got this Grothendieck topology and a Grothendieck construction. So obviously you can build a sheaf topos, and then this sheaf topos has a canonical localic geometric morphism to the pre-sheaves from a base category. And then this is the doctrine of sub-objects of things in the inverse image.
And also, just something which is not related. In fact, this is the way to construct free completion for This is your doctrine corresponding to those different fragments of logic like existential, coherent, and so on, are somewhat internal notion of coherent category, coherent regular category inside of, in this case, pre-shift topos, but also you could do it in shift topos.
Yeah, you can do it in shift.
So those are just internal version of, they correspond to internal version of the free completion corresponding to those different.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is so in Caramella's paper, she has this weaker universal condition where she does the universal condition without base change. And this corresponds precisely to this notion of an internal ideal completion. So this is like a legitimate criticism of my work, is that I'm introducing new terminology where we already had nice ones like internal frame, internal locale, etc., etc. None of you have come up with that, so I will preemptively suggest that it doesn't make sense to talk about universal conditions between things internal to different toposes. So this is a universal condition where we allow a base of change topos. That's what's going on.
Okay, let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.